Okay, quick video, first one done for a while. This one's going to be on variance analysis. So this is based on the A2 2024 paper 2 and question 14.1 through to 14.3. So firstly, we're going to look through the variance calculations, which is 10 marks. So if we go 14.1 was calculate the following variances. I've not clipped the whole question, but it was to calculate material price, material usage, labour rate, and labour efficiency. And so what we've got to be looking at here, let's get my highlighter on, is what these different variances mean. So material price is how much we pay per kilogram. Now, if we look at the data, we've got the top half is all about budgeted data, and the second half is all about actual. And so when we're looking at variance analysis, we're trying to say, are we achieving what we thought we would? So we're what we did do, we're comparing to what we should have done. So if we look at it from a material price point of view, we've been told that we did expect to spend £672,000, and that's it. So what we're going to have to do is determine with the data how much we did expect to pay per kilo. So we did expect to produce 48,000 units, and we expected to use 4 kilos per unit. So what we do is go 48,000 times 4 kilos. That gives us the 192,000 kilos. 672,000 divided by that gives us our expected kilogram price of £3.50. So we use that, and we then compare that to the £2.90 per kilogram, and whether we're actually spending £2.90 per kilogram or not. We've already established if it's £3.50 that we're not. We can use that to calculate a variance. Probably easier. I'm going to go through the mark scheme in a moment for each of the different variants and break it down. But if you want to, is to go through the 2024 question, work it through, could do 14.1, and then I'll go through the mark scheme and work through how you get to the solutions. So you might want to pause, come back, whichever way you want to do it. But what we're looking at is using this actual data at the bottom and comparing it to the budget at the top to get the 4 different variances. So next slide, I've got the answers, and we're going to talk through why they are there. Okay, so just going through the mark scheme. So we briefly went through the £3.50, but just to show you on here, if I get the highlighter, so working 2 confirms that. So the material price, because if we're looking at the material price variance, we're saying how much do we pay per kilo and whether we actually achieve that. So 672,000 divided by 48,000 times 4, which is 192,000 kilos, gives you your expected or standard price of £3.50 per kilo. So one way you could do it, you can say we should have paid 350. We did pay 290, so we can already see it's favourable because we're paying 60 pence less per kilo than we thought we would. We multiply that by the amount of material we bought, which is 216,750 kilos. Now working 1 confirms how you do that. So they produced 51,000 units and they took or used 4.25 kilos per unit, so it's 216,750. So the variance is £130,050 favourable. So you could just do the difference in the kilogram price and just work it that way. The other method, what I would normally do, so we would go, we're buying 216,750 kilos of material. How much should that cost us? How much did it cost us? So it should have cost us £3.50. So that's 758,625. But it did cost us 290. So that's 628,575. Gives you the same variance. Doesn't matter which method you use, just get the answer right. But like we said previously, the favourable is 1 mark, the number is 1 mark. If your number is wrong, as long as you've got some workings to back it up, you'll still get a mark for favourable. So if you could see that it's favourable, they paid less, you're going to get a mark already for that. Just make sure you give it a go. Material usage, what that's saying to you, how much material do we use per unit? How much should we have used? So this particular method, what we've firstly got to do is work out how much material we should have used. So we produce 51,000 units. They've told you in the question you should use 4 kgs, so that's your standard usage. So we should have used 204,000 kilograms. So then what we would do is we'd multiply £3.50, so the standard rate, by the difference in kilograms. So we should have used 204,000. We did use 216,750. So it's 12,750 adverse kilograms. Multiply that by the 350, gives you the 44,625 adverse. The other way of doing it, I prefer that, so you can see the kilograms. You could use that in a written response as well. But what you could do is say, oh, we should have used 204,000 at £3.50, but we did use 216,750. and it's at budgeted price 350 because the 290 is dealt with on the price. And then we just compare those two figures and still make the 44,625 adverse. The other method you could have used, there's lots of different ways of doing this. So you knew you should have used 4 kgs, but you did use 4.25. So you can see it's adverse already by 0.25. So you go 0.25 kgs, multiply that by the amount of units, so 51,000. So we're saying we're using a quarter of a kilogram more than we should do for 51,000 units. That again gives you the amount of kilograms that you can multiply by 350. So lots of ways to do the same thing. Being on labour rate, so labour rate, we're looking at the hourly rate. Are we paying the hourly rate that we thought? So firstly, you've got to work out how many hours that we paid for. So we produced 51,000 units. We worked 3 hours per unit, so we worked 153,000 hours. Then we've got to work out the standard rate. So we budgeted to spend 1,536,000 on labour, and we budgeted to produce 48,000 units for 2.5 hours. So 144,000 hours, and that's my quick maths, that is right. And our budgeted or standard hourly rate was £12.80. So are we paying £12.80? So £12.80 is what we should. We are paying 12, so we paid 80 pence less per hour than standard, so that's favourable. So we can multiply that 80 pence by the 153,000 hours that we worked, and we've got 122,400 favourable. Or we worked 153,000, we should have paid 12.80. So our expected cost would be 1,958,400 for that level or that many hours. However, we did pay £12, so that would have been 1,836,000, which means you've got 122,400 favourable. Finally, efficiency. So efficiency, we've got to know how many hours we should have worked. So the first working is to go 51,000 units times 2.5 hours. So we should have worked 127,500 hours. So we should have worked 127,500, but we did work 153,000, sorry. So we've got 25,500 hours adverse. We multiply that by the 1280, and we get 326,400 adverse. Other way, like we did in the material, we can go, we should have paid 127,500 hours times 1280, which is 1,632,000, but we did do 153,000, 1280 again at the budget rate, 1,958,400. So we still get to 326,400. Again, what you could have done is you could have gone, should have worked 2.5 hours, but we did not, and work out the difference in the hours, so the actual hours per unit, and then multiply that by the units and still get to the 326,400 once you multiply it by the standard rate. A little bit faffier, but you might prefer that. Just looking at some of the notes, material usage, if you got 86,625 adverse, that just means you didn't flex it. So there is an extra mark for W1 in the material usage of 204,000 and W1 in labour efficiency of 127,500. If you forget that and just based it on the standard amount of material or standard amount of labour used for budget production, you can still get 2 out of 3 marks. So 1 mark for the figure, 1 mark for the working, 1 mark for the favourable or adverse. You've got to say favourable or adverse. You're losing a mark for that. We can have F and A. You don't need to write favourable. As you can, a FAV or ADV just needs to be known to the examiner. So you've got the 4 different variances. The next question, which we'll look at, is a reconciliation. So what you've got now got to do is using the variances that you've calculated in 14.1, which are our own figure. So if you calculate those wrong, you can still get marks from here. Prepare a reconciliation, the budgeted to actual cost. Now this has to be apples and apples, it has to be like with like. So budgeted cost needs to be at actual output. So in the question, you were told the budgeted cost of 48,000 units. You need to flex that to 51,000 to give the budgeted cost the expected cost for that level of output. What you then do is you add or take away your variances and then compare that to the budgeted cost. So if we look, the first part, it's the budget cost of 2,346,000. So to work that one out, you firstly add up the 2 shoulds if it was the total variances, or you add up the budget cost figures at the top of the question, divide them by 48,000 units, that gives you the per unit figure, and multiply that by 51,000. What you then do is you take away any favourable variances, because if you're going from budgeted to actual, favourable is going to be lower, adverse is going to be higher. So you take away the favourable and add the adverse. So you go material price, and usage is 1 mark, own figure. So if you had them adverse, favourable the other way around, but if you treat them correctly, you're still going to get that mark, and the same with the labour rate. So there's 2 marks there just for remembering favourable and adverse. Favourable is deducted, adverse is added. You have to have a budgeted actual cost to get those marks. And then the actual cost was just the cost added together in the question. You get 1 mark for doing that. That's a win. Then it's a blank page. You've got to know how to lay out a reconciliation, but that is a nice mark to get. They've put here in the notes, if you did use the budgeted cost of 2,208,000, which is what you were given, you can still be awarded that mark if you didn't flex usage and efficiency, because they can't penalise you for not flexing that twice. They can only penalise it for you in 14.2. So if you then compound that error in 14.3, you'll be rewarded rather than penalised. But the reconciliation has to have budgeted or actual cost to get the marks for the favourable and adverse, so always make sure you've got some figures there. So the reconciliation lots of people don't like, but it's quite methodical and a lot of own figure as well. So to finish off, okay, so finally, we've had 14 marks numerical, you have a 6 mark written. So those 2 structured sections, paper 1 and paper 2, 14 marks numerical, 6 have written. The combination can be varied, but the principle is the same. You've got both of them, section B's, 40 marks. So what we have here is the directors believe the variances are linked, assess whether they're correct. 3 key things makes marking these questions really straightforward. Balance. They've said the variances are linked. Argue why they're linked, argue why they might not be linked. That's balance. Use evidence. If you don't use any numbers, you're going to get capped at level 1, no matter how good your knowledge is. Judgment. You're going to answer the question. It doesn't need to be very long, but needs a sentence or 2 to say whether you think they are or are not linked. So if we look at this, you've got a favourable material price variance. Now obviously, if you've got a favourable material price variance, it means you're paying less per kilo. That could be lower quality. That could be causing the usage because there could be more wastage. So that could be a good argument for the statement. You could also argue the favourable labour rate could be because we've got lower skilled staff who are new, and that's what's causing the adverse labour efficiency. Or you could also argue the adverse labour efficiency is also due to the lower quality material for the material price. Don't argue all 3 of these. You only need 1 argument for the statement. Lots of ones I've marked on this question. 2 arguments for the statement, no arguments against the statement, 4 out of 6. Doesn't matter how good your response is, if it's not balanced, you are not really going to get about 4. It's really unlikely because the whole point of it is a fully balanced argument. So what you've just got to think about is a reverse point, something else that could have caused these variances. It doesn't have to be that they're linked. So here, again, apologies for the squeeze nature of this side of it. So the favourable material price could be just a supply giving discounts. It doesn't have to be lower quality. They're just giving us a better discount than we thought. So therefore, we're saving money. It could be the adverse material usage is because we've got fault in our machinery. A good balance point. You say why that would cause it. It could be efficiency, it could be due to new laws, as we have longer breaks. We've still got to pay staff for breaks, but it's going to be less efficient because we won't produce as much. And there's lots of reasons why these variances would stand in isolation. It's a bit of a weak one, that one, to be fair. But you're just going to go argument for, argument against, quick couple of sentences. Do you think they're linked? So you might go, oh, so in summary, that it does appear that the variances are linked because by having an adverse material usage is likely to be due to the favourable material price being a lower quality. This is because there's also an adverse labour efficiency, which does seem to imply that the lower quality material was slowing up the production line, making staff less efficient and use more material. It doesn't need to be very long, it just needs to sum up what you've said. But balance, evidence, judgment, and you can smash these 6 mark questions. Okay, cheers.